Hi, Alex from Too Busy Reading here. So today I'm joined by Jake Fitzsimons. He's a writer and he's an editor and he's a mad keen Wheel of Time fan. He's the person that introduced me to the series. Jake, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get into it. So Jake, what's your background with Wheel of Time? Like, when did you first read it and who introduced you to it?
I started reading Wheel of Time when I was 13. I had a bunch of older cousins and an aunt that I looked up to that read the series and absolutely loved it. I got The Eye of the World for Christmas and sort of launched right into it. Right as I started high school, I started reading it and I was just, it was difficult to read, but God, I was just so wrapped up in it.
So when you started reading it, like how many books were out? Was it completely finished?
It wasn't finished. At that time, I know at least A Memory of Light hadn't come out.
What book is A Memory of Light?
Memory of Light is the last one.
So when the final book had come out, were you up to it by that point?
I was up to it because I'd read through it as far as I could the first time, made it to, I think, book 7, where things start slowing down quite a bit, and gave up, not out of frustration so much as that it had taken years to even get to that point, and as much as I loved it, I'd sort of run out of steam. Once I heard that A Memory of Light was on its way out, I started rereading it right as A Memory of Light was released. I went and picked up the book and chewed through it in, I think, 2 or 3 days. I couldn't savor it. I was just too hungry to have my answers, but loved it. I mean, as far as the end of a series goes, I don't think any fantasy story has ever left me as satisfied as A Wheel of Time.
And have you reread it since then?
I have reread it in sort of bits and pieces, largely because it is such a time commitment. If you're going to do a reread, you need to really, really commit to it.
It would take quite a lot of time to reread it. Those 4.3 million words.
Yes, yeah. I've been meaning to do it on an audiobook, but even that, I mean, that'll take me months and months and months.
I think the audiobook's quite good though. Something really cool, the first audiobook actually has 2 narrators. So it's got a male narrator for the bulk of it, and then a female narrator for, I think it's like Egwene and Nynaeve's chapters. And then Rosamund Pike did a new narration, which came out a couple of weeks ago. Did you notice a difference in the books at all between the change in authors?
Yeah, absolutely. Once Brandon Sanderson took over, who I think did a fantastic job, it sped up, which is also partially because it was coming to the end of the series, but Sanderson has a very different style to Jordan. And after so long of Jordan waffling on, as much as I like him waffling on, it was quite refreshing to have something move so quickly.
So what were your thoughts when you heard that Amazon Prime was adapting The Wheel of Time?
Excited because I love the series as much as I do, but also very nervous. It was right in the wake of Game of Thrones finishing, or Game of Thrones still in full swing. It felt like everybody wanted to hop right in on what's the next fantasy series we can adapt and rush out and feed to them. So I had low hopes. Also, it's always felt like an unadaptable series just because of how high fantasy it is, the scope and length of it, the sheer amount of named characters. Yeah, I was not confident.
Did you consider not watching the adaptation at any point?
So at the point they announced that Rosamund Pike was a big part of it, I was still nervous, but I like Rosamund Pike so much that I was ready to give it a shot no matter what it turned out to be. But also after finding out just how heavily involved she is with it, I think she has a production credit or a writing credit, one of the two.
Yeah, I think she's a producer.
Producer, okay, there you go. And I heard an interview with her where she was talking about the Wheel of Time series, and she knows what she's talking about. She's really passionate, she really cares. And so I watched it the day it came out and I fell in love really quickly.
So I think Rosamund Pike actually did like some Tai Chi to really get the movements right for when she's using the one power. So I've kept an eye out for that when I watch it. And I think it's great how she does it. Like, it feels very smooth, very natural, very believable. Did you reread it all before watching the TV series?
No, but I sort of trawled through all the wikis, just refamiliarizing myself with everything, and then also just sort of Google image searched looking for the iconic lines that I loved reading the first time through.
Have those iconic lines been in the TV series?
Not that I can think of, but also the most iconic things that I think of are actually in a lot of the later books that were presumably years and years away from the show ever coming near.
So how do you think it would be for someone who hasn't read the books to watch the TV series? Do you think they would enjoy it, or do you think it's more for fans that have read the books before?
I was really curious about that because that comes up a lot in adaptations in terms of, is it for a brand new audience or is it paying fan service to the original audience? One of the other things I was nervous about with it coming out was just that I didn't want my favourite series ever to be tarnished by sort of a widespread public perception of Wheel of Time, that's that horrible Amazon series, isn't it? But I've been very pleasantly surprised. I know so many people who have never read the books, don't know anything about it, jumped into the TV series blind, and are absolutely loving it. Now just pretend that I'm sitting here.
So I'm going to ask you for your rapid thoughts on some changes that the adaptation has made. So the first one I want to talk about is Perrin's wife and what happens to her. What do you think about that?
Not 100% on it, but I think that's partially because we haven't seen that thread tie up. I do like that it really sets Perrin up as being a pacifist.
So in the TV series, there's much more uncertainty about who the Dragon Reborn is. The prophecy has been changed a little bit. What do you think about that?
I really like it. I mean, the mystery in the book is not there. It's very clear from the get-go. The fact that the show has added this extra layer of mystery that doesn't have any bearing on the actual outcome of the story that I'm attached to, I think is great, because it's also giving people that are brand new to the series something to really latch on at the beginning and discuss with each other, which I really like.
The main characters, which is Rand, Matt, Perrin, Nynaeve and Egwene, they've all been aged up from about 15 to 20. What did you think about that?
I really like that. Anytime an adaptation ages up characters, I mostly think it's necessary. I mean, Game of Thrones wouldn't have worked with their mature themes if you had much younger actors playing them, which is how they'd be accurate for the books. And I think sort of the same with Wheel of Time. In my mind, reading it, maybe because I was always younger than them anyway, they always struck me as sort of young adults rather than mid-teenagers.
Sort of going on with that, I found the theme of the Wheel of Time has shifted a bit. It's more mature, it's a bit more grimdark. I think the books are more of an adventure fantasy. So what do you think about that change in tone with the adaptation?
I think it's only a small change in tone in that violence is implicit. Robert Jordan, he just doesn't dwell on it in a way that other fantasy authors do. And I think changing to a visual medium, you need to include that. It can't all just happen off screen. But I also think fantasy fans in general have become quite bloodthirsty and really have an appetite for violence, courtesy of the influence of Game of Thrones. I really felt that way at the beginning of episode 2 with the opening with the witches. I'm talking like a white cloak. With the white cloaks and the Aes Sedai. That was really graphic and not something that happened in the books, but yeah, I was there for it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think that was my favourite opening as well. Early on in the books, there's this mysterious dark cloaked horseman, and only a certain number of boys can see it. And we later find out that this is actually a Fade who's stalking the characters. Now in the book, it's quite this looming fear, but unfortunately it's not in the adaptation. Were you disappointed that it wasn't in there, or do you think it was necessary to remove it?
So I was disappointed, and I also think it's necessary. I was disappointed because reading the books, particularly at the age of 13, I remember having such a visceral feeling of like, whatever is going on with that mysterious cloaked figure, that is terrifying. But I also think it was sort of necessary to remove because that really works well in your imagination. I think it would look too hammy on camera.
So you mentioned before that your older cousins and your aunt originally got you into the series. What do they think of the TV show so far?
So a couple of them are planning on starting it, but none of them have yet, and not one of them actually ended up finishing the series. They sort of passed it on to me, and I became a diehard fan and made it all the way to the end. But like so many readers do, they hit about 7 or 8 and just put it down and didn't come back to it, which is a shame.
Jake is the person who got me into Wheel of Time to start with. I'd sort of come across it before, but I'd never been that interested in reading it, and you pushed me to read it. And I got to 6 or 7 and I was like, no, I've had enough of this. I have to put it down. I'd been reading through it as quickly as I could, and I couldn't keep reading at that pace. I was just exhausted. I was Wheel of Timed out.
Yeah, well, for those, I never blame anyone for tapping out at that point, but for anyone that does make it through, it's totally worth it. The payoff is just incredible.
With the book, what are some of the best things that you think it does? Particularly being a younger reader when you first came across it, how did that change what you were looking for in fantasy?
I'd certainly read fantasy beforehand, but it was the first one that had a really big impact on me. I think it set me up to be very comfortable with long reads and long stories. I really like the sort of experience of something being so massive that you can sort of crawl in the spaces within it and really inhabit the world.
And I really noticed that it was massive as well. Like it really felt like it was months that I would just spend reading and really digging into it, which for me is something that I actually didn't like. And I'm not sure if that's because I came across it when I was a bit older. What are some things that you think the TV show does that's better than what the books did?
Brevity for sure. I mean, I really love the length of the Wheel of Time books, but it's a hurdle that so many people can't get over and keep such a great story from so many people.
And are there things that you think the TV show does more poorly than the books?
Better and poorly, I think I'm really just describing the difference in mediums, but I think that the brevity is also a bit of a challenge in that part of what makes the book so fantastic is just how long they are and how much time you have to develop character, live within the setting, and the show doesn't have that. And the show can't have that.
Who's your favourite character from the books?
Rand is actually my favourite character, not just because he's the primary protagonist, but his arc and his journey and the intensity of it and sort of just how many different facets of his personality we see. I really like, there are so many series where you have a primary character who has the weight of the world on their shoulders and they just sort of like tucker along and deal with it.
Yeah, they're just like, okay, this is fine.
Yeah,
I've been trained to do this.
I'll just keep going with this. But you really get into Rand's psyche. You see him fail time and time again. You see him make the wrong decision over and over and over again. And it just makes... It makes his character, but also where his character goes, it's earned. It all really... It feels real because we see so much of it and it changes so much. He's not just sort of the stoic... stand-in Marty Sue sort of character. It feels real.
And has that changed the character that you relate to the most moving to the show?
I think it might be too early in the show to really figure that out. I'm finding Egwene more engaging in the show than I did in the books, which is really nice. And I think I might be finding Rand a little less engaging because we're not seeing nearly as much from his point of view. I don't think we've quite seen his character fleshed out and developed in the show the way that I would like it to.
I think at the moment he also takes a bit of a back seat because of all this stuff going on with Matt and him sort of spiralling down into this illness. I felt like the focus has been on Matt in the last few episodes more so than Rand.
I think courtesy of the mystery around the dragon, to keep Rand as sort of a surprise, he's taken a back seat.
Also in the first episode, so when the trollocs attack, it might be like 20 or 30 seconds for Rand, but he's not in the village when they attack, so there's so much more time about Perrin fighting trollocs and Egwene sort of running away and Nynaeve getting carried off, so I felt like that had much more focus on these other characters than Rand had.
Certainly Rand's confrontation with the trollocs was the most iconic part of the attack on the two rivers in the book, and it was just sort of one of many moving pieces in the show.
And in the book, he just comes to the village and it's already been attacked. It's all done and dusted, so we don't even see that.
I think, again, that's just the nature of switching mediums.
What are your thoughts on the costuming so far?
So the costuming is really interesting because it's different to how... I keep comparing it to Game of Thrones, but it's hard not to. Game of Thrones started off with sort of very rugged, simple and realistic looking costuming, and that changed as it went on. But it began quite gritty, and Wheel of Time hasn't done that at all. Everything looks kind of almost manicured and everything, which I initially found a little off-putting, but I really like that it separates itself. I think that there's been too much of a focus in fantasy in general on that sort of grim, dark vibe that isn't always needed. This is high fantasy. I really like how much effort has clearly been put into everything, and the fact that it means that I'm being given a different visual treat to what I'd been getting in Game of Thrones. So I'm actually a really big fan of the costumes.
And what you mentioned about grimdark, like, I think in recent years the focus has been that fantasy is the backdrop, but it's not really the focus. Whereas Wheel of Time, like, magic is at the forefront almost always.
One of the things that I really like in Wheel of Time is that magic, even though it's sort of not as prevalent with the main characters given where they come from, the world is built around it and it's there and it influences everything, which is very different to Game of Thrones, where Game of Thrones is more focused on politics, and then magic is introduced as this external element that changes things. I prefer it in Wheel of Time because the magic system is very clearly defined. Nothing ever feels to me like the sort of wishy-washy Harry Potter style of magic where I suppose if you say the right words, you get the right outcome.
Yeah.
Whereas the way that the weaves work and the way that the Aes Sedai have learnt to use magic, it feels very earned.
There's always like a cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think about the CGI and the visual effects? Do you think it's done well? Do you think it sort of looks realistic?
I think a lot of it looks really realistic. Some of the use of the power, some of it could use a little bit of work, but it looks nice, and it's season 1.
I want to talk about the trollocs actually, because I think the trollocs look fantastic.
I'm really impressed with the trollocs. I really like the emphasis on what seem like they're practical effects and people in suits. I always think that ages so much better than CGI does. It sort of really gives them presence within the scene, which I'm really enjoying. Like, the trollocs should feel absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, and they do.
And they do. The scouring of the two rivers was intense. They were horrifying.
Particularly the bit where they're dancing and then that guy sort of just pauses and you see like a spear or an axe through his chest. And then it goes to the trollocs and you're like, oh wow, what's going to go down here?
It's huge. Yeah.
And then they're just massacring villagers left, right and centre, and it's like nothing can stop them. The other thing about the trollocs that I quite like is every so often there's a trolloc that's running along on all fours, and that to me makes it even more terrifying because they're distinctly not human at that point.
Yeah, really emphasising the bestial nature of them.
What do you think it is about The Wheel of Time that makes it so great?
I think the scope of it, which is also what puts a lot of people off, but I think if you're going to tell a story where the fate of the entire world hangs in its balance, you probably need 4.3 million words to tell it. Like, I need to believe the characters, I need to believe the world, I need to really experience the growth of everything in that world to feel like it's all at stake. And over the course of the series, I think that's certainly achieved.
Is there anything else you want to add about The Wheel of Time?
I think that everybody should check it out, particularly the show. I mean, I've spent a long time recommending to people to read the books, and most of the people that I have who've actually read it have fallen in love with them. Plenty haven't as well, but if you've ever been curious about it, the show's such a great jumping off point, and if you really like the show and you just have to know what happens, pick up the books. They're great.
Thanks for joining us today, Jake. If people want to hear more from you, where can they find you?
Thanks for having me, Alex. If people want to hear more from me, they can find me on Twitter at Jake_Fitzsimons. And if you've got an interest in Magic the Gathering, you can read my articles on commandersherald.com.
So that's what Jake and I thought about the Wheel of Time books and the TV series up until episode 6. And remember, if Rosamund Pike can rock those shoulder pads, so can you.